Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. This is my counter rebuttal, the part 2 of it. Continue on, responding to Abdullah Samir. At 12:34, Abdullah Samir says, Mustafa states that the earth is not built upon pillars. The Quran is correcting the misconceptions of the time that the earth was held upon the pillars. This is accurate and amazing. See, in the initial video, Abdullah Samir was saying, well, why does the Quran mention that there are that the Quran says there are pillars in the earth, in the heavens? He says, why would the Quran mention something like this? Can we see pillars? And he was basically just ranting on, talking about these pillars, right? I mean, why would he, if he was sure, why would he say most likely? So he doesn't have the evidence, and I asked him, show us the evidence, and he can't actually show us the evidence where the Prophet Muhammad specifically said that the sun goes around the earth. And he can't show that. He can't show it through the Quran, nor can he show it through the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad. But he keeps lying to say that this is how Muhammad wrote it or understood it. And again, there's no specification of that. So again, why are these ex-Muslims being so dishonest in interpreting the Quran or the hadith? Again, he says, look at his blog, does the sun set in Murky spring? Well, if you want to bring an argument, then you bring it here. You don't say, I'll refer over here, look at my blog. If you're coming here to debate it, bring it here. And again, folks, we've already responded to this, that the sun goes into murky water. Visit the link below, Abdullah Samir, and see it for yourself. We've already refuted this point. He then brings up the point about sun prostrates to Allah. And he says, well, how could this be so? My response to him was, this is just metaphorical in obedience. And it doesn't mean physically, the sun's going to bow. The sun doesn't have the body, the arms, the legs to stand down and bow and stuff like that. So it's metaphorical. When the sun goes down and so forth, this is only from metaphorical speech that it bows to Allah in obedience. And then he wants to remind us by a hadith. And the hadith says, and I know this hadith, I've read it 100 times. It says, I don't know why he even brings it here, because it doesn't actually prove anything. He says, once I was with the Prophet in the mosque at the time of the sunset. The Prophet said, O Abu Dhar, do you know where the sun sets? I replied, Allah and his apostle know best. He said, it goes and prostrates underneath Allah's throne, and that is Allah's statement, and the sun runs on its fixed course for a term decreed. Exactly. So this is metaphorically. You don't understand metaphorical language. That when he said, where does the sun go? After it's set, it goes down and prostrates to Allah. This is metaphorical, meaning that after the sun has set, it has abided by the law of Allah, so it metaphorically, obviously, prostrates to Allah. And I've given him the evidence in the Quran where it is also stated that the trees and the stars also prostrate. So obviously, prostration here means they worship in obedience by submitting to his rules and regulations because Allah has created them with rules and regulations. Their prostration is different from the prostration of humans. This is just basic common sense. And this sort of metaphorical language is even taught in the hadith when Muslims prostrate to Allah in their own prayers. It is said that when a Muslim makes dua while he's praying and he opens his hands and he's turning towards Allah, Allah continues to look at that Muslim until if the Muslim leaves his prayer and turns away, then Allah turns away from him. Now, does Allah turn away? I mean, does this mean that Allah doesn't see that Muslim anymore? No, of course he still sees that Muslim. It's just a metaphorical way of saying that because the Muslim has now abandoned the prayer, he's left the prayer, he's turned away from the prayer, now Allah metaphorically turns away from him as well because the job is complete. It doesn't mean that Allah doesn't see him or is completely turned away from him. No, Allah is with them all the time. Okay, so this sort of metaphorical speech is all over the Quran. So when the sun prostrates under the throne of Allah, this means that he has submitted to the throne of Allah. This is all it means. And the throne of Allah is all the laws and the legislations that come from his kingdom. It's a symbolic way of showing that you've submitted to God. This is what means when it says sun goes and prostrates under the throne of Allah. Again, he shifts the goalpost. When I tell him to check Islam Q&A about the sun prostration, I was telling him to check verses and hadiths and things like this. He then brings a fatwa saying, he's trying to criticize Islam Q&A. So the earth was created first, not the heaven was created. So he brings a fatwa. I mean, this is called another technique called poisoning the well, yeah? So no one claims that everything that is stated on Islam Q&A is correct. Not every fatwa is correct, okay? So when I tell him to go and look at Islam Q&A, I was telling him in reference to Islam Q&A about how the sun prostrates, metaphorically and things like this. It gives better details there. So then he says, should I go to now Islam Q&A? Because Islam Q&A says that the earth is created first, therefore Islam is false. Well, no, Islam isn't false. The fatwa could be false. Amazing. I mean, see these straw man arguments? It's just, it's like, you want to bang your head up against the wall. It just gives you like a sore tooth. These are the pathetic arguments, I'm sorry, that we have to put up with. And of course, he'll say to me, Mustafa, you called me stupid. You called my arguments pathetic. You called me stupid. Well, this is why I'm calling them stupid. They're just incoherent and straw man. I mean, you're doing your best to take me out of Islam and I'm hitting my head up against the wall and I'm going, this guy's pathetic. Honestly, pathetic. If you want me to leave Islam on these points, this is so weak, honestly. I criticize my own thought process every day. I challenge myself. And you know what? It grows stronger. I can even come up with stronger and better arguments than this, honestly. I could come up with stronger and better arguments to this to question Islam. If you gave me this job, I'd do a much better job than these people. There are much stronger arguments to present. That's what I'm saying. But, I mean, these arguments here, they're childish. This is child play. Let's continue. He says, science keeps changing and so this is my point where I said science keeps changing and reaffirming itself because, these atheists like relying on science. Science is the truth. Science is a fact. Islam is false because science said it was true. And my response is science is ever changing. right? If science makes one statement one day, it changes it the next day. So simply relying on science to disprove Islam is incoherent. So what does Abdullah Samir says? He says, yes, it does. So he agrees that science changes. He says, we can take it with a pinch of salt, but much of science is so well proven now, it is very unlikely to change. Very unlikely change. He says, Newton laws of motion. Okay, he goes on to this bullshit response of, oh, look, the fundamentals of science don't change and so forth. Newton's law of, there are certain things I agree that don't change, yes, but there are a lot of things that do change, especially the arguments you make against Islam using science. Next, he then goes back to Dhul Qarnayn. He says, this is my point where I said there is no source that says there are millions of them. He's not quoting any source. He's drinking too much alcohol and dancing with the fairies. He responds back by saying, I'm not sure about the alcohol and the fairies, but the Quran says they will be a swarm of them and will leave them that the day of surging over one another, and a horn will be bone and will assemble them in one. Okay, again, it doesn't say millions, right? He said millions. So you could have 30 people to be considered a swarm. You could have 100 people to be considered a swarm. You could have 1,000 people that could be considered a swarm. So how did you go from that to millions of them? It doesn't make sense. So it actually shows the exaggeration and how they actually manipulative and lie about the situation. And they like to exaggerate more than it is. So unless you have something concrete, why make the argument? There are millions of them. And this shows the inconsistency of these atheist apostates and ex-Muslims. This is really funny. He brings up the Prophet Muhammad said, on the day of resurrection, Allah will say, "O Adam," will reply, "Lebbaik, our Lord, Sadaq, will be a loud call saying, Allah orders you to take from among your offsprings a mission for hellfire." Adam will say, "O Lord, who are the mission for the hellfire?" Allah will say, "Out of each 1,000, take out 99. Again, nowhere in that does it say millions are part of the Gog and Magog. Doesn't say that. That doesn't work. So then he brings up Musnad Ahmed. He says, it says in Musnad Ahmed and Sunan of Ibn Majah, they will drink all the water. Well, I knew he was going to bring that up. But in that same statement, does it say they will drink all the water within one sitting? Does it say over a few days? Does it say over a few months? Does it say over a few years? We don't really get that. Does it say the size of the pond, the size of the lake? Does it say, the depth of the lake? No one knows that as well. So then how do you then draw the conclusion to say it was millions of them because they finished the water in the lake, when you don't have diameters, you don't have circumferences, you don't know the period of time? So again, it's a nonsensical and incoherent argument to say because they drank from the lake and they finished it, therefore it must be millions. And I've already refuted this in my previous argument that even if it was millions, you can still trap millions of people in a tunnel deep beneath the earth, in a huge expanse and a cave for them. And you can even provide them with water, oxygen. Allah could do any of those miracles and provide them sustenance as well. And through miracle intervention, give them time in there where he could keep them alive, just like he kept the sleepers of the cave alive for over 300 years. And remember how I accused Abdullah Samir and I said, it's really silly because he went from one unknown to another unknown. And he says, this is regarding atheism, because I said to him, and he replies back and says he doesn't have the answers to where we came from, because I asked him, he doesn't know as an atheist where he came from, and then he wants to be a denier of God. yet he goes to atheism, but he says he would rather be at I don't know instead of having the wrong answer. Well, you don't know uncertainties in Islam as well. Regarding your claim that Islam is false, I mean, you can't prove that Dhul Qarnayn does not, and Gog and Magog does not exist. And because of that, you choose to leave Islam, I mean, as one of your reasons. But then you go to atheism, and you don't know whether God exists or doesn't exist, but you still go with atheism and agnosticism, and you even make fun of God by comparing him to some fairy tale and imagination. That's not saying I don't know. That's confirming to me that you're even mocking the idea of its existence. So although you're saying you don't know whether God exists, you're still holding a position, and it's not even a neutral position. You're holding the position that Allah is a false God, right? You're holding that position. You're not saying, well, I don't know whether Allah exists. You're saying Allah is a magical fairy tale, and you're holding on to your position as an atheist. And then you go on to say, oh, well, you can explain some of the possibilities of where our universe came from. Well, yes, there are many possibilities. There's over something like, I don't know, more than 10 theories on where the universe and so forth came from. But again, they're just hypothetical statements. Again, you go with uncertainty. So when it comes to Dhul Qarnayn, you're like, oh, Dhul Qarnayn doesn't exist. There's no proof for it. The burden of proof lies on you. But then when we ask you for burden of proof, you say, oh, well, these are the possibilities. But they're just possibilities. They're not actual facts that you can actually prove. So can we now say to you, well, your worldview is now wrong because you also believe in these possibilities, but then you criticize religion and Islam and say, well, Islam believes in these possibilities, it can't be verified or proven, therefore Muslims are on a false religion? I mean, why would you then make such statements, such certain statements, when you're actually accusing Islam and religion? Makes no sense now, does it? And yes, you do have to answer to where you came from. If you want to challenge Islam, then we can challenge your worldview. Because if you're saying, well, where did Allah come from? Where is Allah? Where's Dhul Qarnayn? You want to critique the sun going under the earth and all this nonsense. But then when we're asking burden of proof for your worldview, because now you want to convert us to atheism and agnosticism, and you want us to be ex-Muslims, but you're not even providing evidence why God doesn't exist, or why you think that we didn't come from Allah and Allah didn't create the earth, but the earth was created by something else and the earth came from something else, or this universe came from something else. But you can't even prove that. You can't even prove that it wasn't done by the act of God. You can't even prove where this universe came from. You can't prove it. You can give hypothetical statements. You can bring up all these possibilities, quantum fluctuation. You can bring up, multi-universe theory, string theory, so forth. You can bring up all these theories, but again, it doesn't answer the question, the real facts of where the universe came from. It doesn't. It just gives hypothetical statements how it was created and where it came from. It doesn't give substantial evidence. Like, for example, if I told Abdullah Samir, grab all of those raw ingredients of what created the earth and the universe and all the complex life forms, take that soup, put it in a scientific lab, see it evolve over millions of years, through cosmic evolution into, abiogenesis, and then through abiogenesis we have, obviously inorganic materials turning into living materials. I mean, you can't even prove that in a science lab, non-living matter coming into living matter. You can't even show that whole system of ecosystem emerge. You can only show, evolution and where ape and man came from. You make all these theories of where living matter came from, but you can't actually demonstrate it in a science lab through the expansion of the universe and so forth. And then you want to then say, oh, look, we'll just remove all that. We'll skip all that. We can come up with all these theories where the earth or the universe came from, where you can't even get part A correct and you want to move to part B. And then the atheist will try and humble himself and say, oh, look, I don't know. We'll work it out in a million years. We've never created living matter, but in a million years we'll create it, right? Well, in a million years, you may come to me and doubt me my religion, but we're here in the present time. You need to disprove it now, and you can't do that, right? And no, the intelligent life has not been created. Not in a test tube, nowhere. They've tried to create some synthetic organisms which they copied from existing proteins and yeast and machine software using borrowed DNA, synthesizing it in another machinery cell, then claiming they've created synthetic life forms when they actually borrowed it. So they're far from creating life forms. And of course, when an atheist doesn't have an answer to this, he'll say, I don't know. Again, he'll go from one uncertainty to another uncertainty, and he'll say, oh, just give us a million years, we'll prove it one day. Abdullah Samir then goes on to say, he's quoting my statement. I said there is no, because he tried to speak about the justice in Islam, and he tried to bring up the emotional arguments about the suffering and so forth. So I brought this back to the atheistic attention that, there's no justice in atheism. That's why you need Islam. It gives justice in the hereafter. Abdullah then responds back and says, and that wasn't all that I said, by the way. But then Abdullah says, that's like saying, you should remain Hindu because Hinduism has karma and atheism has no such thing. Islam has no justice. The justice of Islam is arbitrary, and the most criminal Muslim will eventually go to paradise, and the best kafir will enter hell. This is not justice. This is joke, and this is not true. It is just made up. Muhammad, whatever, blah blah blah. Again, he completely distorts the Islamic position. Instead of raising a question, ask me a question to say, look, please, Mustafa, educate me about Islam. Because I as Samir, I used to be an ignorant person when I was a Muslim. I wasn't properly educated. Please educate me, right? So I'll educate you on this. Why the worst criminal Muslim will eventually go to paradise and the best kafir will enter hell. You see, Abdullah Samir doesn't understand that there are degrees in heaven and there are degrees in hell. You get the lowest level, you get the, which is the worst part of hell, and then you get the second. I think there's got about 7 layers, 7 heavens. You got 7 heavens, and you even got hell in different degrees. And we are told that Abdullah ibn, this is the Prophet's uncle, Abdullah Muttalib, he'll be in the top part of hellfire, which is the least part of hell, the least punishment. And Abdul Muttalib, only his sandals will burn and his brain will boil, and he will think that he's getting the worst punishment, but in actual fact, he'll be getting least of the worst punishments. And so when one person understands that there are different degrees in heaven and hell, then when a person says, when Abdullah says, for example, the worst criminal Muslim will eventually go to paradise, well, the worst Muslim will go to paradise, but it doesn't mean that he won't go through worldly punishment. It doesn't mean that he won't go through punishment in the grave. It doesn't mean that he won't go through punishment in hellfire before he enters heaven. As for the best kafir will eventually go to hell, well, he may get the best part of hell, right? It doesn't mean he'll get the worst part of hell. So that's still justice. I mean, you can't expect the best kafir to actually go to paradise over the worst Muslim. Why? Because the worst deed in Islam is the deed of kufr. So when you say the best kafir, what do you mean by the best kafir? There is no such thing as the best kafir compared to the worst Muslim. Because what we need to look at is what is defined as a good Muslim and a bad kafir, or the best kafir. And this is what we called iman, the fitrah, to believe in God, to believe in Allah. And not just on the heart, but on the tongue. Therefore, no matter what criminal activity the Muslim does, he will still find the recompense of that. As I said, in Islam, we don't believe, as the Christians do, that you simply don't get any remission of, any consequences. Jesus loves you, you're all forgiven, you all go to heaven. No, that there is still a recompense. And Allah purifies that soul in heaven or on the day of judgment. Not in heaven, on the day of judgment, or in the grave punishment, or in hellfire. And the best kafir, he will not get the worst of the worst punishments. He would get the highest degree in hellfire. He won't get, obviously, the worst of the worst positions, which is the 7th level. So again, look how Allah still measures the justice. Therefore, please understand the Islamic theology, which you couldn't understand when you were a Muslim. So understand Islamic theology properly before you criticize it. And notice Abdullah Samir didn't even touch upon my response to him when I challenged, and so he basically just ignores it. I mean, he's been doing that through this whole debate. He doesn't answer my questions. When I said to him, where is the justice in atheism that if you commit all this murder, all this pedophilia, all this serial killing, the justice system doesn't catch up with you, you basically turn into worm food and there's no justice. I mean, how does he even comprehend that in atheism, in agnosticism? How does he comprehend that? And how does he even have the nerve and courage to accuse Islam? I mean, okay, fair enough. Let's say Islam is unjust for punishing the best unbeliever. Well, then, how does he then go from that, leaves that, and then he goes to atheism and says, oh, well, look, in atheism is more just. It makes more sense. But then he goes to atheism, and in atheism, you see that a kafir, a person who is a criminal, he does all the crime in the world, he gets away with it, let's say the law doesn't catch up with him, he gets away with it, turns into worms, and there is no justice for that person. I mean, do you see how warped Abdullah Samir's mindset is? He leaves Islam because he thinks it's unjust for sending disbelievers, the best of the disbelievers, to hell, but then he goes to atheism where the worst of the worst criminals die and get away with their crimes without having God punishing them for their crimes. Interesting. He then says, when dua is answered, ex-Muslims say it's a coincidence. He's quoting what I said. When dua is answered, ex-Muslims say it's a coincidence. Because Abdullah tried to say, oh, look, when prayers are made, they're never answered, blah, blah, blah. And Abdullah Samir then quotes the Harvard prayer study in one such experiment where researchers tried to study the effects of prayer and found prayer doesn't work. But what Abdullah forgot to tell you is that the Harvard prayer study was actually based on Christian prayers and not Muslim ones. He didn't really do his study too well now, did he? Here we have a lecturer by the name of Nauman Ali Khan. He actually responds to the claim that Allah doesn't respond to prayers, and he breaks it down pretty nicely from the Islamic concept. Have a listen to this.
Living in a time that is riddled with a lot of confusion. There are lots of questions that we have of all kinds. But on top of that, there are crises in the world. There are many of you who have family, for instance, in Syria and places like Syria all over the world that are on fire, where families aren't safe, children aren't safe, where all kinds of human disaster is happening and people are being killed. It's almost like fulfilling the word of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the killer will not know why he's killing and the killed will not know why they're being killed. And so in that kind of crisis, some people start not only questioning, why is this happening in my personal life? They start questioning, why is all this crazy stuff happening in the world? And how am I where is Allah in all of this? Can't he just fix these problems? And it's not like we're not making dua. You know, Qunutun Nazila every night in so many masajid around the world. Allahumma ansuril Islam wal Muslimin. You know, Aiz al-Islam wal Muslimin. Aid the Muslims, aid Islam. Give strength to the Muslims, give strength to Islam. Ya Allah, aid us against the enemies of the deen. But it seems like the enemies are just getting better and better at spilling more and more blood. So at that point, somebody gets really frustrated with their religion. And they start thinking, there's no point. Why do I even make dua? What's the point of it? Nothing's going to change. And this is actually a very common problem. The point I'm trying to make is oftentimes we think the purpose of dua is to change the reality around us. We focus on changing the reality around us. But if you study the du'as in the Quran, and the majority of the du'as in the Sunnah carefully, you'll notice that the change actually you're asking for is a change in yourself. You see, what happens to, and this is actually very easy to understand in our times, we live in a hyper-consumer society. So everything comes quickly. You want to be entertained, just open up an app on your phone. You want to buy something, just order it on Amazon, it'll show up at your door. Everything's become effortless, and everything's become instantaneous. You want something, it'll come to you. You don't have to go to it, it'll come to you. Everything's quick. We're used to getting served now. We're used to constantly getting served. And if one order of yours is 2 days late, 3 days late, you're going to give it 1 star, thumbs down, bad rating. You're used to this now. And now you make dua to Allah. Or you expect Allah to take care of some of your problem, but you're so used to getting things done so quickly and immediately. And when it doesn't happen, we're like, this is poor service. I need better customer service. You know, I'm not going to go to Allah again and place an order. Because you're a customer now. You're entitled now. He turns his face from Allah. You know, he didn't even listen to me. He didn't even solve my problem. Understand that Allah Azza wa Jal has a plan for everybody. And just to give you a comparison, in the case of Yaqub alayhi salam, who lost his child, Allah returned his child to him after years. Many years. All those years this father cried, yes? This father almost lost his eyesight, and eventually وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ, Quran says, some of the ulama like Alusi rahimahullah comment, you know, the Amiya, and he became blind from crying. But all this time, where was Yusuf? Yusuf was in a prison. Yusuf is being held in, you know, he was a child servant. When he got older enough, he got thrown into prison. He spent many of his years in jail, so either he served as a servant, or he served as a prisoner inmate in jail. Not a good life. It's not a good life. But at the end of it all, when he interprets a dream of the king, and that dream means that entire economy is going to collapse in 7 years, and people are going to die of starvation, the only one who knows how to handle that crisis was Yusuf. Had he not been in jail, he would have never helped the king. You understand this? If Yusuf was with his father the whole time, alayhi salam, that never would have happened. But now that Yusuf is there to interpret the dream and says, Inni hafizun, I am the one who can take care of this responsibility. Make me the treasury secretary. Give me this responsibility. When he does that, and he takes care of it, what happens next? What happens next is thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of parents don't have to cry that their children died of starvation. One father cried for several years. But his tears, Allah made them a way of saving thousands of families from crying. Because if he didn't save that economy, and he didn't save that crop, the entire land would have been in drought, and people would have died of starvation, and war would have happened, all kinds of crises would have happened. Sometimes the difficulty you go through isn't just better for you. Maybe through your difficulty, you will become a sadaqah jariyah for so many others. You don't even know. You don't know. But if you're on the edge, you don't have that kind of trust in Allah. So you turn your back to Allah. انقلب على وجهه. And then Allah says, خسر الدنيا والآخرة. This is what I want to leave you with. When people do that, they have lost this world and the next. What does that mean? This person lost this world and the next.
So Nauman Ali Khan gives clear evidence why Allah may delay your prayers not being answered, because he knows the wisdom. And then the conclusion is where I accused Abdullah of not being sincere. He was probably going after materialism, sex, drugs, alcohol, the lifestyle of atheism. He then responds back and says, I do believe I was sincere, but let's say I wasn't sincere. It doesn't actually matter. Look at my arguments on my videos or blogs and see if I made sense. This is the crux of argument. Well, I'm judging you for this argument, why you actually left Islam, and you made an argument based on that. And based on those arguments, I don't believe you're sincere. Now, if you're referring me to other arguments on other blogs, well, that's just shifting the goalpost, because I'm addressing this specific video, why you claim that you left Islam. I mean, you didn't give us a whole bunch of other arguments on other blogs. I mean, I'm addressing this direct argument and this direct video of yours. And upon those arguments, no, I don't believe you're sincere one bit. I think that you had, a lot of ignorance being a Muslim, as proven in this video. You showed how you were pretty much embarrassing in your interpretation of the Quran. You're completely insincere, because you've even lied upon the translation of the Qurans multiple times. You got caught shifting the goalposts. You got caught shifting the topic. You even stopped answering my questions. You, in fact, even made lies about Gog and Magog being millions, and it doesn't say millions. So you got caught on inconsistencies, lyings, misquotes, misrepresentations. So, I mean, yeah, you may have left Islam for materialism and sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever it is. You may have left Islam because you were just an intellectually bankrupt liar, and, you just weren't truthful enough, you weren't sincere enough. And I honestly hope that one day you wake up and you become a bit more sincere in your approach, in life in general. And I actually pray that Allah opens your heart, honestly. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a boxing match. I don't want to, constantly let you down and talk negatively about you. But I mean, I really want to speak good about you, Abdul. Honestly, I honestly don't believe you're a bad human being. I mean, I believe that there is good in every human being. I just think that evil, shaitan as we call him, he has overtaken your soul, and he has deluded you and confused you into evil and misrepresented the true human being that you are. And I believe that the true human being is within you, the fitra, as Allah says. I ask Allah that you repent and you turn back to his tawheed. I don't know if you will, but as you said, I mean, now that you quoted that hadith, again, that hadith is now relevant. If earlier it wasn't, now it is relevant. That, of course, I can't judge your heart. And this is why I say, may Allah, make you an honest person. I hope you do become an honest person, and you ask for forgiveness and you turn back to God. I heard that your wife or your girlfriend, I'm not too sure. Well, you are married, so it must be your wife. She's a Muslim apparently. I hope she's listening to this too. I don't know what you've been saying to her. I heard you are married to a Muslim. I hope I honestly hope you listen to her, you listen to me, you become more sincere, you look at the arguments and you just learn Islam from educated people. Go to Islamic apologetics work instead of running around, going on to Wikipedia, Wiki Islam, copying, pasting all these arguments, listening to your sidekick Abdullah Gondal who misrepresents Islam. You're in a bad crew, honestly. You're in a bad environment. You're in a bad circle. These critics have got no real foundation to their arguments. And when you actually press them, when you go deep into their arguments, most of it's just full of assumptions, fake assertions as, Gog and Magog, it can't be proven. Well, can you prove it yourself? No, I can't. Can you disprove it yourself? No, you can't. Oh, okay, well, I'm just going to go to the position. I don't know, I disbelieve. I mean, these fallacious assumptions, they're absolutely unworthy, honestly. I hope Allah cures the evil inside you and destroys the evil inside you. You repent and you come back to Islam.